I'm delighted to have Shamubeel Eaqub joining me, and this is just going to be a bit of a free-flowing conversation. So I saw you were on before, Shamubeel. Welcome to the Seeds Impact Conference.
Thank you. Good to be here. I'm on the way to my meeting room, but we can do it in the car while we're going.
Okay, that sounds good. Is that passenger side? Is that correct?
Definitely,
Okay, I was
definitely.
gonna say, Shamubeel, you just pull over. It's okay. We don't need to do it right now. You are incredibly busy, and you've literally just come off of speaking at another event, and I think in real focusing on social cohesion and some reports you've been producing with the Helen Clark Foundation. We'll put it in the chat. But this is just going to be a bit of back and forth. We don't have any set questions, but as we're talking, Shamubeel and I would love to hear your questions. So put them in the chat. Ask us what you want to know. But Shamubeel, you joined this. I first did one of these 6 years ago, and you were one of the guests way back then. We were talking about COVID and how COVID was the major thing. I feel like 6 years later, the world has moved obviously on from COVID, but it still is full of uncertainty. When we were first talking, I had no idea what our topic was actually going to be because there is just so much going on. Can you speak a little bit to the place we find ourselves? And we're recording this in May 2026. And any thoughts on the current world situation that you've got?
Yeah, so if I think back to the time, Stephen, I think we were trying to be optimistic. We're trying to be optimistic because it felt like it was a time when people were coming together. At the beginning of that COVID, we had this extraordinary time when we got together and acted as community. But it very quickly frayed, and I think the underlying pressures of society really came through very rapidly. And it seems to me that we're probably in that phase now of erosion of trust that has really kind of reinforced itself. I think there's still an underlying desire for people to want community and sense of belonging, but we're finding it harder and harder. So what I see around the world in terms of the rise of polarization, the politics of division, the politics of hatred and punching down, it's infecting countries around the world, and we're not immune. So I probably feel a lot less optimistic of what was possible on the back of COVID several years ago to where we find ourselves today. But I think the underlying themes of what we want to achieve haven't really changed. They remain that thing about how do we find community and belonging. And my my experience of the last little while is I've been doing this documentary. I've been recording this documentary, and what's been really fascinating is the people who just get on with it in their local communities because they love their place, they love their community, and despite their differences, they come together and do stuff. So my current bandwagon is all these pressures that we're seeing around the world are true, are real, but that volatility cannot be solved easily. But what we can do are those things that we can do in our community. And the key ingredients for that already exist. It just needs to be unlocked.
That's a great way to start. And I actually remember bumping into you in a tiny airport. I think we were in Dunedin, and you were like, Stephen, and you were there shooting that documentary. So I'm looking forward to seeing it. Um, just while you're getting out of your car and going in, yeah, it's interesting times, isn't it? Like where we are. I'm wondering if you're able to share a little bit about some of the social cohesion work that you've been doing. And what has that been revealing to you? As I said at the start, for those who are joining, I have an accent, but actually moved here as a young person, but I have been an immigrant, and occasionally I notice things, with the accent that I have. But could you speak a little bit to that social cohesion factor? And I'll let you. Are you getting your key? Yeah. And while you do that, I'm just going to say something completely different, which is that there is a recording of us talking a year ago about social cohesion. So, Bridget, can you put that in the chat? Um, and the thing that struck me was how actually there has been fragmentation, which has been happening in our society, and that there have been divides. And what I've been noticing is that there seems to be a growing gap between wealthy, poor, Um, so yeah, it's a challenging time and a challenging situation. Um, are you able to speak to that?
I am. I've
Yeah.
found myself a room, and it's the perfect time to do it. So the social cohesion work is, for me, really quite important personally because when I've when I'm trying to do my economics work, what I'm finding is that you can design the most good technical policy, but it doesn't work because we haven't taken people with us. And that, to me, that's what social cohesion really is about, is for us to be able to grapple with big issues when things are difficult and challenging, but we're able to come together and make it happen.
Mm,
So there's an element of that that I think is really important. But within New Zealand, what we're seeing in the data is that we don't have a great deal of social cohesion across five dimensions of things like belonging and those kinds of things. What I'm finding is that um, our level of social cohesion is below what is seen in Australia, and it's been slipping over the past 12 months. And the main cause of that is poverty and inequality. And therein lies, I think, a tractable solution, but also in the current economic climate and political climate, one that becomes very hard to deal with because politics at the moment is very much about punching down and punching down to the poor.
mm,
Um, in terms of where we find ourselves, I think a lot of it's to do with how New Zealand has become very fractured. So I see New Zealand very much in the sense where we have a good bunch of us, say about 30%, that are actually doing okay. We're well connected. Things still work for us. There's about 40% of us who are kind of at the margin, but we think things will work out. And there is 30% of New Zealand that goes, actually, the system is rigged. I really hate this. I want big change. And I'm motivated. I'm going to support political parties. So there is an element of activation that's taking place, but it's very oppositional rather than one that's collective and one that's, I guess, constructive. So to me, the social cohesion work, which is massive, but in this particular context, I think therein lies, I think, the big challenge for us is when we want to make change, how do we do it if we're not a cohesive society? Because inevitably, change requires bearing some costs and sharing some benefits.
mm.
Without that, we cannot do that. So therein lies, I think, the big challenge here.
So let's dive a little bit deeper into that. That's the overview. For those of us on the call, I think there's about 400 right now, and there's many other hundreds who will probably watch this later or listen to it. What are some practical things, or what are some pragmatic steps that we could be implementing or taking within our own local communities? Because every person here has multiple hats. What are some ideas that you've got?
Yeah, a few. And again, have a look at the report if you get a chance. So what we did this year is we had a look at how um, some of the programs in the UK that we've been trying on the back on to improve social cohesion and what has worked and what hasn't worked. Quite often, where those big policies haven't quite worked is because they have tried to use existing ways of doing things. So, for example, when they wanted to improve social cohesion because of crime, they just gave more money to the police. And that didn't work very well, right? Because people didn't trust the police in the first instance. So that doesn't work. But the kinds of things that worked were much smaller in nature. There were things like when they had um, I don't know, community language classes or community gardens or community repair shops where people came for a common interest, but they had that repeated interaction with each other. That was really powerful. Where those big government policies did work were very specific. It wasn't what of the policy, but it was the how of how the policy was implemented. When we when we are making any kind of change, implementing a change, there is the easy way of doing it, which is going, this is what we're going to do. We're going to get it done, and you will like it. The other approach is actually that messy approach of actually going to the community, understanding what their needs are and what will work in those places. And that how, that rather than the what, is what created social cohesion. And I think that's the bit that New Zealand can do so well, is we do have communities that are willing to engage on issues that are relevant to them in their local community. And so I think that's probably where we have this element of, I don't know, some way that we can, if we can, when we do a public policy or when we make a decisions in a business or in a community organization, if we're able to do it more in the community with people, with that proper consultation, that is probably going to be one that actually generates and enhances social cohesion. in a very personal level, I think it is about just reaching out to other people, having conversations with people who are not like you, being open in open spaces where other people are. All of those things are really powerful. I would get a real kick out of just being in a cafe when I'm just being around people or turning up to an event and seeing lots of different people there.
Mm,
And that really helps.
mm. Well, that's a great tip, I think, for all of us to remember is to actually be talking with the communities because there's a lot of people on this call who are involved in a lot of different organizations, and the worst case scenario that I've seen is when somebody comes. So, as a lawyer, I help people set up charities or purpose-driven organizations, and sometimes one of my questions will be, "Well, have you talked to the people you're trying to help?" And if the answer is, well, no, this is just my solution, I think it will help them. There's a fundamental problem, right? Like you need to go talk to the people, work out what the need is, what would actually help them rather than coming in with the kind of I solved it and here it is. Yeah.
I think you're right. I think there is a difference between what's efficient versus what works in an enduring way. They're not the same things. And I think there's some places where you can do specific things that can work. So I don't know. Uh, it has to be a little bit horses for courses. There are some times where you will have to do this. And but there are also some, if we only do that kind of convenient way of doing things, that doesn't work.
Yeah, totally. Can I just say, Shamubeel, how jealous I am of your ability to put things succinctly when you're moving from room to room and
Sorry about
Uber
that.
to another place. Like every time there's a different background behind you. It's amazing. And acknowledge the work that you put in to be able to be here today and share with us. I'm going to take the conversation in a slightly different direction now. We often talk about the economy and we use terms like GDP and as if, gross domestic product, that's what we got to aim for. I'd like you to talk us through some of the newer ways of framing from an economic perspective. What what is the economy? And in particular, I'm thinking about things like well-being economy, donut economics. There's other phrases as well. But it's this kind of, hey, maybe we haven't been looking at all of the right measures of how an economy is doing. Can you just speak to that from your economist perspective? What are you seeing? Is this a trend, or what is it showing us about what the future might be like?
Yeah, look, I think we're seeing some really encouraging developments, including in New Zealand. The Wellbeing Alliance has been doing some excellent work. Some of the frameworks that Sally Hitt and others have put together, I think, are super useful. So I think it is about expanding that conversation beyond that. The other aspect that I find really attractive is the Matauranga Maori kind of perspective, the tikanga approach to the economy. And I think those are the kinds of things that gives you the ability to look at the economy differently. But when we talk about GDP, it has always been known that GDP is very much a proxy or a indicator of prosperity. It was never meant to be the measure of prosperity. The idea was that, generally speaking, if average incomes are increasing, typically you'll also see other things improving at the same time. But that's not always true. And a lot of the work that I follow that helps me kind of think about these issues is, for example, the work of people like Darren Acemoglu. So Acemoglu, Robinson, and Johnson won the Nobel Prize a couple of years ago for economics, and their work was very much around, well, we can describe the economy with things like GDP or jobs or incomes or capital and wealth. Yes, you can do those things. But what causes prosperity? That's a very different question.
Mm,
And their underlying premise and the answer to their question for them after their career of research was the thing that causes prosperity is culture and institutions. And institutions are just the formalized elements of culture. So I think there's some amazing research work thinking that has developed over the course of the last 40 years that gives shape to why we cannot be too so dumb that we look at one indicator as somehow it's going to be the perfect measure of economic success. There are many, many ways of doing it. But fundamentally, I think what I look for is, are more people made better off? And do we have dignity for the most vulnerable in a society? Because those are the two measures that I think means that you have succeeded.
I love that. Thank you. It's really helpful just to think about things from this system level perspective. And I just want to give an acknowledgement in the chat. People keep putting your questions. And I just noticed that Carmen from the Chi Commitment had put a comment saying, is anybody else here from the same sort of sector looking at food? And there's a whole bunch of people who've commented and they're forming their own subgroup within the chat, which is wonderful. So maybe that's something that you want to do with your sector. See if we can get a few little subgroups going. Shamubeel, thinking we're going to jump in a time machine. We've talked already about Mokopuna decision making, thinking in the future. We're jumping in a time machine and we're going 100 years from now. It's going to be great. What do we think it's going to be like in 2126? What are the things that we need to change now in terms of how we're looking at the economy? And what could it be in the green shoots sort of perspective?
Green shoots. I like that. You always have the hardest question, Stephen. It's not an easy one for me to answer because right now I'm not feeling very hopeful. I feel like there is a lot of conflict that we're navigating, and we're making many bad decisions right now, decisions that are selfish and short-sighted that will cause us, I think, to veer from the path of prosperity that's possible, peace that's possible. So having said that, I think, when I think about what's going on with climate change, geopolitical change, these are the challenges of our times. And for us to be able to do that differently, to actually rise to the challenge, what I would like to be able to see is for us to be able to have conversations across difference and build coalitions that are good enough rather than perfect. And I think that's where we've gone wrong in recent decades, where we've been working really hard to get a tribal response that are 100% aligned to our ideologies or our science or our views, rather than a messy process of good enough that we keep building on gradually. And I don't know if that's a very good answer, but I think it is about the being human in the way that we make change, that we work on it, we experiment, we try things, and that's what got us through. Because I don't think there is one way or one thing or one way approach of doing things that's going to get us the outcome.
I really like that answer, and it intersects with my work as a lawyer because I get really frustrated when people say, but that's the way it is. That's the way it is. If we could
But
go
it's
back,
changeable. It can
exactly.
change.
And the thing is, Shamabli, you know this, like company legal structures, people are like, but it's the company is the only legal entity type, but they didn't exist. You go back
We
even
invented it.
100 years, it wasn't what it is today. So it doesn't have to be what it will be in the future. That's where I get hope is that 100 years from now, and unless we're all taking amazing vitamins, we're probably not going to be here. If we can build the foundation now, if these sorts of engagements and the thought leadership that we on this call can show within our own spheres, learning from what Shamubeel is saying, learning from what I'm saying, applying it in your area, then I see that there's future. Because, for example, we could have a new type of company called impact companies. We could do things differently. We could mainstream the idea that investing isn't just impact investing. Investing should consider impact in everything it does. So we shouldn't feel so stuck in what is and not what could be.
Absolutely. And I think, looking backwards is useful because it's context, but the future is not the past, right? And, the history doesn't repeat, it rhymes, all that kind of stuff. I'm talking to you from Palmerston North at the moment, and I was giving a talk just before, and I was talking about Wanganui, where I'm not particularly popular because I called it a zombie town some years ago. And right after I called it a zombie town, the place started to grow. And quite a lot of that growth was because the community was really together, not because of me, but in spite of me. They had worked really hard together to create job opportunities, quality of life that was good, a place that's working well. And all of those things are really powerful things and actions that they took to take control of their own agency. Another example was the Kai Housing Trust in Kaitangata. And they were building this community center, and they were finding that they were asking, what do we need to do to make this a success? And they said, look, we need to have more people. How do we get more people? We should have more homes. How do we build more homes? We have sections that are cheap. Well, they just needed a little bit of money from the Tyndall Foundation. They borrowed $1 million, but that was been the beginning of, now they've built nearly 50 houses in Kaitangata. and there are young people living in there. The school roll is growing, and in this tiny little mining town with 800 people suddenly have 50 new houses and young people in it. So there's so much of this good stuff that happens in these communities because people just get together and just get on with it. So
Mm.
I don't know, like I feel like there's so many seeds of hope in these stories that I see around the country. But each of the stories are unique, but there is something that's common underneath. And the common thing is a sense of shared purpose. I think there is an ability to come together, and there is leadership of people who step up. And Joyce Beck, who was there, I was interviewing her, and she said she had this line from her mother, which said, "Service is the rent you pay in this life."
Mhm.
And I thought that was beautiful.
Mm. That's wonderful. Yeah, well, at the start, we were talking about, I guess, the longer term perspective and thinking we sang Te Aroha to begin our session, thinking about peace. And I really love what you're bringing to the table here in terms of how do we actually change things for the future. Um, Shamubeel, what research is most exciting you, or what are you working on that you're excited at some point to be able to share with others?
Well, the most fun I've been having is doing this documentary. So, 10 years ago, I wrote this book, Growing Apart, about, the plight of regional New Zealand, where they were hollowing out. And I was saying, but this is a love letter to regional New Zealand. There's so much that's good about regional New Zealand. How do we protect and look after those places that can survive? And so this project is really about going to these communities. So I'm going to Tokoroa and Balclutha and collecting stories from these places. So we've done over 50 interviews. And the stories I've heard, the people I've met, it's just been phenomenal. It hasn't been all perfect, but what's been really fascinating is when you do that element of active listening, you understand that there is still so much heart that's left in Heartland, New Zealand.
Mm,
And I think therein lies the seeds of success in how community can kind of be much more resilient. When I see the kind of the tensions, whether it's in politics or geopolitics, I feel like what we want are sanctuaries, places where people feel safe and part of something and belong. And it doesn't have to be Heartland, New Zealand, but in any community, I think that's the piece of work that's been really exciting me is seeing what is possible when people come together. And it's happening in spite of politics and politicians and people in Wellington. They don't give a shit. They're just getting on with it.
I love it. Well, we're going to look forward to seeing that when it comes out. Yeah, that's really special. We met up in Rolleston relatively recently. You were there at a town hall event, or it was at the library, actually. But I really admired the way that you were engaging with just the public was there. They had some questions, and let's have some back and forth and discussion.
Yeah, look, and absolutely. And I've been going around the country doing road shows with Simplicity for the last few weeks. We went to Invercargill and Dunedin and Hamilton and Palmerston North. And, we've had hundreds of people who are coming to these meetings, not because we're asking for anything. We've got nothing to sell. This was just to say thank you to our members, to have a conversation about the economy and society. So, just now I just finished a talk on the economy at Palmerston North in Globe Theatre. And it was a fabulous conversation.
Mm,
People had good questions. They were genuinely interested. People are trying to make sense of the world. And I'm not saying economists are the only people, but it's a perspective. And having that perspective and multiple perspectives, that plurality of views, is such a helpful way for us to understand the world. And that's what I enjoy, like going out, seeing people. And so I'm hoping that when the documentary comes out in a few months, we're hoping to put it out in July. Hopefully, it'll be one of those things that creates a little bit of a conversation about the kinds of things that we can do. And hopefully, it'll be a fun story as well.
that's awesome. Well, you've successfully made us anticipate this, so that's really good. We will be watching out for that. And Shamubo, maybe the final question. You mentioned simplicity. Do you mind explaining what simplicity is doing, what it's up to? And yeah, I think that would be interesting for people.
Sure. So, look, I mean, I'm very proud to belong to the Simplicity family because I share the values of the organization. And our values are pretty simple. Like the thing that drives us is how can we, as a financial services company, be a source of dignity to New Zealanders? That's really what we're trying to do. Whether we have done it yet, I don't know. But the way we try and do it is make sure we have low fees, that we are trying to kind of use our money to make New Zealand better, invest in housing, hopefully invest in infrastructure, all of those kinds of things. When we take our fees, we put a fee of this 15% of this fees into charitable actions. So all of these kinds of things for me at Simplicity is about being part uh, of the fabric of New Zealand's financial institutions to try and hopefully offer an alternative for something that helps people save, but also that saving itself creates some change. The reason I joined Simplicity is because I also want to make sure that the policies around retirement savings and other things are both equitable and better. And so it was a real opportunity for me to be able to speak directly to politicians, into policymakers, and all of those people to try and make the change. So the job is not done. The job will not be ever finished, but certainly when it comes to my role at Simplicity, I'm very privileged to have it because one, we're supported by nearly 190,000 members, and two, my job is to one, tell the stories of New Zealand and hopefully improve retirement income policy in New Zealand.
That's great. Well, in the chat, we can put links. So we'll add a link to Simplicity. People can have a look at that and make sure they check it out. I know firsthand the great work that's done because, as you know, the Community Housing Funding Agency, which was in the last panel, and James Palmer was on that panel, that's had a huge amount of support from Simplicity. So literally couldn't do it without Simplicity. And you served with me on that board for several years of Community Housing Funding Agency, which is when we first got to know each other. So, Shamubeel, I'm probably going to host another one of these in, say, October. Can I already ask, would you be willing to come and have an update? Because between now and October, who knows what's going to happen? Does that sound okay?
Absolutely.
Uh,
Anytime.
Great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Shamubeel. If we were not virtual, I'm sure there would be a round of applause. So thank you for taking time, jumping from your Uber into the hotel, into meeting rooms. We really appreciate it, and your insights were very valuable. So
Thank you
make
so
sure you
much for
check
having me.
out everything. Oh, there's lots of claps and everything. So make sure you check out the work that Shamubeel does. Let's amplify each other's work. With Shamubeel, when he puts out a report, share it, add a comment. When people on this call, if you get to know them, amplify each other's work. It's the simplest thing you can do. You know it's going to be good. It takes you 10 seconds to repost stuff. Why not help others get their messages out? So, Shamubeel, thank you for joining.
Thanks so much for having me.